house stood silent, save for the occasional groan of old wood settling as the wind whispered through cracks in the windows. The attic door, slightly ajar, beckoned Isa, its darkened interior promising secrets long buried. The dust in the air shimmered like forgotten memories, thick and heavy, as though time itself had held its breath here. Isa's fingers brushed against the wooden beam above, catching a glimpse of the faded photograph tucked beneath an old, moth-eaten box. It wasn't much a simple thing, yellowed with age, but it felt heavy, as if it had waited for her. The light from the single bulb overhead flickered, casting long shadows over the forgotten relics of a life once lived. She hesitated before lifting it carefully from the box. The image stared back at her. A man, her father, Edward, younger and smiling, beside a woman who seemed so familiar. Though Isa couldn't place her, the woman cradled a newborn in her arms. Isa's breath caught. She knew that face. It was hers. Her fingers trembled, the photograph suddenly, unbearably heavy in her hands. The quiet around her felt thick, oppressive, as if the house itself had come alive, watching, waiting. Every floorboard creaked, as if to remind her this place, this attic, held truths that were meant to remain hidden. She could almost hear the old house whispering to her, telling her to put the picture down, to leave it untouched, but it was too late. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Isa's heart quickened. There was something more to this photo, something her father had never told her. A secret buried in the attic, waiting to be uncovered. And with it, a truth that would change everything. Isa's world had always been one of polished perfection. The towering walls of the Caldwell estate, sprawling and immaculate, seemed to stretch endlessly, as though they were meant to contain only the finest moments of a life well lived. Her father, Edward, a man of impeccable calm and controlled precision, seemed to embody the very essence of that order. He was the kind of father who smiled, but his eyes were always distant, as if there was a wall between him and the world he had created for them both. And in that world, there was only one thing Isa truly trusted: Maria. Maria had been with them for as long as Isa could remember. She was more than just a housekeeper. She was the mother Isa had never had. While Edward's focus was on his business dealings, Maria's presence had filled the spaces Isa's heart needed most: a gentle touch, a warm smile, and the soft whisper of stories during quiet evenings. She braided Isa's hair, wrapped her in soft, loving arms when she cried, and shared with her the little secrets of the world. Isa had been told her mother had died in childbirth, a truth Edward had never questioned, a story that had never once been doubted. He told her that after her mother's passing, he adopted her, and that was how she came to be his. But something about those words never quite sat right with Isa. Even if she didn't know why, she never questioned them, not aloud. But there were always moments when the feeling of something missing, something kept from her, would slip through the cracks. A distant, unnamed ache that lingered in the quiet corners of her heart. It was on a Saturday morning, One of those days when the air was soft with sunlight, that Isa first felt the stirrings of unease. She had been sprawled on the living room couch, her dark braids falling messily over her shoulders, eyes glued to her phone as the house buzzed with the quiet hum of daily life. Edward was at the poolside, sipping his coffee with the kind of casual ease that seemed to come so naturally to him. And Maria, ever faithful, was vacuuming the lower floors, moving gracefully from room to room. Her voice soft as she asked Isa to move her feet so she could clean beneath the couch. Isa barely noticed the passing of time until Maria's voice came again, this time calling from the base of the staircase. "Miss Isa," she said with a quiet tone of instruction. "Your father's asked me to clean the attic today. Could you come help me move the boxes?" Isa frowned, a quiet defiance flickering inside her. The attic. It was a place she had been told never to enter. The place where dust and memories lingered, where her father's unspoken rules seemed to hang heavier than anywhere else in the house. She had always wondered why. There were whispers of old things up there, remnants of lives long past, things that were not meant to be touched. But that, she realized now, only made it more intriguing. With a quiet defiance, Isa followed Maria up the stairs. As they neared the attic, the air felt thicker, heavier, like stepping into a place where time had been forgotten. Edward's voice rang down from the pool, a calm directive that carried an edge of something Isa could never quite understand. "Maria," he called, his voice warm. "Don't let Isa up there. It's not a place for children." The words stung in a way Isa couldn't quite place. Not a place for children. She was 14, not a child. But she said nothing, merely nodded at Maria, whose gaze met hers for a split second, an unspoken agreement passing between them. Still, Maria's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the attic key, her fingers brushing against the brass like she was unlocking something far heavier than just a door. As Isa followed Maria up the narrow stairs, she could feel the air grow colder, the creaking of the house beneath her feet filling the silence. The attic was a space that felt abandoned by the world below, cluttered with boxes, old furniture draped in dust, and memories too painful to keep in the open. It felt wrong. This place, as though its very existence was a secret kept from her, and maybe even from the world. And then she saw a bit. At the far side of the attic, tucked behind a stack of old trunks, something that caught her eye, a photograph, partially hidden beneath the faded box. The light flickered above her, casting shadows across the room as she approached, her hand shaking as she picked it up. It was old, the edges curling, the color faded to a near nothingness. But there was no mistaking the faces in the photograph. Her father, younger, with a woman she didn't recognize. A woman whose face held a strange familiarity, but Isa couldn't place it. She stared at the photograph, her breath catching in her throat as her eyes drifted to the baby the woman was holding in her arms. It was an image frozen in time, and yet it felt more real than anything Isa had ever known. A knot formed in her chest as the silence of the attic stretched between her and the truth she could feel just beneath the surface, threatening to break through. It wasn't a place for children, her father had said. But why? Why was this attic, this room, off limits for so long? And why had no one ever told her the truth? Maria's voice came suddenly, breaking the quiet tension like a whisper from the past. "Isa," she said softly, her tone pleading, "you shouldn't be here. We should go back downstairs." But Isa didn't move. Her hands trembled as she clutched the photograph tighter, the weight of it settling heavily in her chest. Something had changed in that moment. Something inside her that had always been dormant, always been hidden, began to stir. The questions that had haunted her for years, the doubts she had never voiced, suddenly felt urgent, demanding to be answered. But that wasn't the end. From somewhere behind that silence came a sound she hadn't heard in years. It was the soft creak of the floorboard beneath her father's footsteps. And then, just like that, the attic door slammed shut, locking them both in, as if the house itself had decided they were never meant to leave this room. And the truth, it was only just beginning to unfold. The photograph in Isa's hands felt like it had grown heavier, pressing against her chest as though it were more than just paper. The woman in the image. Isa couldn't shake the feeling that she knew her. Her heart thudded in her ears as she stared at the familiar warmth in the woman's eyes, the same eyes that Isa saw in the mirror every day. The woman, though much younger, looked uncannily like her, the same shape to her cheekbones, the same curve to her lips, the same depth of color in her skin. And yet, she wasn't her. How could she be? Isa's breath caught, the knot in her stomach tightening as she turned the photograph over, half expecting to see something that would explain it, a name, a date, a clue to tie it all together. But there was nothing. Just the worn edges of the photo and a thin layer of dust that had settled over it, untouched for years. She looked back at the woman and child in the picture, her mind racing. She knew this woman. She had to. But who was she? And why had her father kept this hidden? Isa. Maria's voice trembled through the silence of the attic. Isa hadn't even realized how still the air had become, as though the entire house had paused with her, holding its breath. "Maria, who is she?" Isa whispered. Her voice almost got in her throat. The question spilled out before she could stop it. But even as the words left her mouth, she felt a strange unease, as though the question was one she shouldn't be asking. Maria shifted uncomfortably beside her. She hesitated, her fingers fumbling with the cleaning cloth in her hands. Her gaze flicked toward the attic door, as if checking for someone or something. Isa could feel the tension rise in the space between them, thickening the air. Maria took a step back, her voice low but insistent. "Isa, we shouldn't be here. You don't know what you're getting into. Your father." But Isa wasn't listening anymore. The photograph burned in her hands, demanding answers. She needed to understand. "Maria, please," she said, turning toward her. "Who is she? The woman in the photo. She looks like me. Maria's expression tightened, her face growing pale. The quiet hum of the house, the distant sound of the poolside water lapping gently against the edges, was suddenly drowned out by the pulse of Isa's heartbeat. Something was wrong, something Maria wasn't saying. Before Maria could answer, the attic door creaked open. A chill ran down Isa's spine as her father's figure appeared in the doorway. His presence filled the space, and Isa immediately felt her chest tighten. There was a coldness in the air that hadn't been there before. A silence so heavy, it pressed against her ribs. "What's going on here?" Edward's voice was calm, unnervingly controlled, but there was something darker behind it, something Isa couldn't quite place. Isa froze, the photograph still clenched tightly in her hand. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if she should even speak at all. The questions that had been swirling in her mind felt suddenly dangerous. Too dangerous to voice in front of him. "Isa," Edward repeated, his eyes locking onto her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "What are you doing in the attic?" She opened her mouth to explain, but the words caught in her throat. His gaze flicked to Maria, and Isa watched as Maria's shoulders stiffened, her eyes quickly dropping to the floor. "Maria, I trusted you," Edward said, his voice low and cold. "I trusted you to keep things in order. And this," he gestured toward Isa and the photograph, "this is what you've been hiding." Maria didn't speak, but the guilt on her face was clear. Isa watched as Maria's hands clenched into tight fists, her body trembling slightly. The air between them all thickened with tension, and for a moment, it felt as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I didn't mean for her to see that, sir," Maria stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward's expression darkened. "No more excuses. Get out. Now." The words hit Isa like a slap to the face. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. Maria, who had been her closest confidant, her surrogate mother, was being dismissed just like that. Her father's anger, usually so contained, had erupted, and it was terrifying in its cold precision. "But, Dad," Isa began, her voice weak, but her heart was pounding. "What about the photo? Who is she?" Edward's eyes flashed with something darker, something Isa had never seen in him before. He crossed the room quickly, his movements deliberate, as if he was trying to control everything in his path. He reached out and snatched the photograph from Isa's hand, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of panic in his eyes before it was gone, replaced by a cold, unfeeling calm. "I told you not to go up here," Edward said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And I told you to stay away from things that don't concern you." But why Isa's voice trembled with more than just fear. There was confusion, too, a feeling that the ground beneath her was shifting, and she couldn't keep up. "Why did you keep this hidden?" Without another word, he turned to Maria. "I said leave. Now. I don't ever want to see you in this house again." Isa's heart twisted as she watched Maria slowly nod, her eyes full of sadness and resignation. But there was no time for explanations, no time to process the weight of what was happening. Maria moved toward the door, but before she left, she glanced back at Isa, her expression full of an unspoken promise. Isa wanted to reach out to her, to stop her. But her father's presence filled the room like an oppressive force. Edward's eyes never left Isa. He didn't flinch as Maria passed him, didn't look at her again as she walked out of the attic and down the stairs. He was too focused on Isa, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "What did you find up here?" he asked, his voice colder now. "What did you see that you think you're entitled to know?" Isa could feel the tension in the room tighten like a noose around her throat. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. All she could think of was the photograph, the woman who looked like her, and the questions that now bubbled to the surface. But the fear was too much. She could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her chest. And she knew somehow that whatever was hidden in the attic wasn't something she was meant to understand. Not yet. But she would. She would understand, even if it meant uncovering something she couldn't yet bear. The truth was beginning to crack. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same. Isa's heart pounded in her chest as she crept up the staircase, the familiar wooden steps creaking beneath her weight. She knew it was dangerous, knew she was defying her father's wishes once again. But the need for answers was stronger than the fear of his wrath. There were too many questions left unanswered, too many shadows hovering just beyond her reach. The attic door loomed ahead, closed and silent. But this time, Isa wasn't turning away. The moment her fingers brushed the cool brass of the key, a shiver ran through her. She paused. The house felt different tonight. Colder, as if it too knew what she was about to uncover. But she turned the key anyway, the door creaking open on its own accord, like an invitation into a world that had been locked away for far too long. The attic smelled of dust and forgotten things, a mix of stale air and ancient memories. It was still and empty, just as it had always been, except now. Isa knew something was hidden here, something that had been kept from her. Her eyes moved over the cluttered shelves, the stacks of old boxes, and the forgotten remnants of a life that had been stored away in the dark corners of her father's house. The photograph, the one with the woman and the baby, still burned in her mind. A memory so vivid that she could see the woman's face even with her eyes closed. She needed to find more, needed to understand why that woman had been kept hidden from her, and why her father had lied so convincingly about everything. It didn't take long to find it. A dusty, leather-bound photo album sat forgotten atop a pile of old newspapers. Isa pulled it out carefully, brushing off the dust as if the pages might hold something sacred. Her fingers trembled as she opened the cover, revealing the yellowed pages inside. The photographs were faded, the edges curling from years of neglect. The first few were innocuous family holidays, birthdays, pictures of places she had never been, But then she found it, the one that sent her blood running cold. A family portrait. The same woman, the one she had seen in the first photograph, was now dressed in a wedding gown, standing beside her father. The smile on her face was radiant. But what made Isa's stomach drop was the undeniable truth that her father was holding her. Not as an adopted daughter, but as a wife. The image, once a mere curiosity, now felt like a gut punch. A betrayal that pierced straight to her core. Her hands shook as she turned the pages faster, desperate to confirm what she had already seen. There, in the next photograph, the woman was holding a small baby in her arms. A tiny infant swaddled in a blue blanket. Isa's breath caught in her throat. She had seen that baby before she knew it in her bones. The woman wasn't just a stranger. She was Isa's mother. This woman, Lena, was her biological mother. The realization hit Isa with the force of a tidal wave. All these years, her father had lied to her. He wasn't her adoptive father. He was the man who had taken her away from her mother. The woman she had always been told was dead wasn't. The truth had been buried in this house, hidden in plain sight. And now Isa was standing on the precipice of it all. The weight of it pressing down on her chest like 1,000 pounds. And from the darkness of the attic, there was a shifter sound. Isa's blood ran cold as the door behind her creaked open. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She already knew. Her father's presence filled the room, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "I told you to stay away from here." Isa turned slowly, her hands gripping the photo album so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She didn't flinch, didn't even take a step back. The room was thick with tension, and the air around them felt suffocating. Her father's calm demeanor, the one she had always trusted, now seemed like a mask slipping away, revealing something darker beneath. "Dad," Isa's voice cracked, her heart pounding in her ears. "Who is she?" "The woman in the photograph. Why did you keep her from me? Why did you lie?" Edward didn't answer immediately. His gaze flickered to the photograph in Isa's hand. And for a fleeting moment, she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of guilt, of fear, quickly masked by his usual composure. He stepped forward, his steps deliberate, his presence overwhelming. "Put it down, Isa," he said, his voice tight with something she couldn't quite place. "You don't need to know any of this. It's over. It's in the past." "No," Isa whispered, shaking her head, refusing to look away. "It's not in the past. She's my mother, isn't she? She's Lena." Edward's eyes hardened. The silence between them stretched, and for a moment, it felt as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to speak. When he did, it was not the calm and soothing voice she had known all her life. There was a crack in it now, something raw, something real. "She was my wife," Edward said, his voice cold. "And she was your mother. But you were never supposed to know about her." Isa's mind reeled. "What do you mean? Why didn't you tell me?" Why didn't you ever? She was a threat. Edward interrupted, his voice now more forceful. A danger to everything I worked for. I couldn't let her take you from me. I couldn't let her ruin everything I had built. So I took you. I kept you with me. You were safer with me. Isa felt the blood drain from her face. You took me. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the pounding in her chest. You stole me from her. Edward's expression faltered, the faintest flicker of something regret passing over his face. I did what I had to do, he said, his voice quieter now. Lena wouldn't have been able to give you the life you deserve. She was unstable, and I had to make sure you were raised properly. She wasn't fit to be your mother. But you... He paused, swallowing hard. You were better off with me. Isa stepped back, her hands trembling as she held the photograph tightly in her fingers. You manipulated her. You took me away from her. You kept me from her for all these years. Edward's jaw clenched. His calm demeanor, the one he had always worn like armor, was now slipping. You don't understand, Isa. I did what I had to do to protect you. I did what was best for you. You're my daughter, not hers. She was just a pawn in your game. Isa interrupted, her voice rising now, her anger and disbelief bubbling to the surface. You never wanted me to know the truth. You wanted to keep me in the dark, keep me in your control. All these years, you've been lying to me. The mask finally broke. Edward's cold, calculated expression shattered into something desperate, something darker. He stepped closer, his hands trembling slightly. You don't know what you're asking for. Isa, you can't understand the weight of it. I did what I had to do to keep you safe. But at what cost? Isa whispered, the pain of it all settling in her chest like a stone. Her father's eyes filled with something Isa couldn't quite name. But she didn't want to find out what it was. She could see it now. Everything he had built, everything he had hidden, had been a lie. And that lie had kept her trapped in a story that wasn't hers to begin with. Isa stood in the suffocating silence of the attic, the weight of her father's words pressing against her chest, suffocating her. The photograph, the smiling faces, the innocent scene that had once seemed so ordinary was now a mirror, reflecting back a truth that shattered everything she thought she knew about her family. The woman in the photo, the one she had assumed was a stranger, was her mother, Lena, and her father had bought her from her. Like a possession, like something he could claim as his own. Her mind reeled, unable to grasp the full extent of what he was saying. You paid her. Isa's voice was small, a quiet gasp in the overwhelming quiet of the room. You bought me. Edward's face was a mask of something Isa could barely identify. But there was no mistaking the pain that flickered behind his eyes, something too raw to hide, something that made him seem even more distant than before. I did what I had to do. Isa, your mother, she wasn't stable. She couldn't give you what you needed. I paid her. I offered her money. a lot of money, to give you up. It wasn't supposed to be like this. But she refused to let me have you. The words were slow, careful, like a man confessing something he had rehearsed but never intended to fully reveal. He looked at Isa, his gaze desperate, almost pleading. I gave her everything she wanted. I gave her the life she couldn't have without you. She was unfit. She couldn't care for you. But I wasn't just a thing you could buy. Isa's voice cracked with the weight of the realization. She stepped back, the photograph still clutched tightly in her hand, as though it could somehow hold the truth together. I was your daughter, not some transaction. Edward flinched, his composure cracking. I thought if I kept you, if I protected you, you'd have everything you needed, the life you deserved. You were better off with me. Lena, she was unpredictable. She couldn't. Stop, Isa shouted, her voice trembling with raw emotion. The words were suffocating her, each one sinking deeper into her soul, making it harder to breathe. You took me from her. You took my life, my truth, and turned it into something you could control. All these years, everything was a lie. Edward stepped forward, his eyes desperate, trying to close the gap between them. But Isa recoiled, stepping back into the corner of the attic. She felt small, trapped by the space that had once seemed so familiar, but now felt as though it were closing in on her. Isa, please, he whispered. You don't understand. You were never supposed to know this. I did what I had to do for you. Tears welled in Isa's eyes, her throat tight with emotion. The betrayal. How could her father, the man she had trusted above all others, do this to her, to her mother? The life she had lived, every moment of it, was built on the foundation of a lie. She had always felt something missing, some dark shadow hovering over her childhood. But now she understood. It was him. It was always him. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick, like the air before a storm. Isa couldn't speak anymore. Her thoughts were a blur, and her heart felt like it was being ripped apart. I was never your daughter in the way I thought I was, she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. I was a price, a transaction. Edward's face twisted in anguish. But Isa wasn't sure if it was guilt or simply the frustration of seeing her pull away from him. Isa, he said again, but there was nothing more to say. The truth was out, and it was too much for either of them to deny. Her eyes blurred with tears as she looked down at the photograph in her hands. The woman who had given birth to her. The woman whose face she shared was not the dead memory her father had painted for her. Lena was alive. Lenny had fought for her, and Isa had never known. But that wasn't all. There was more. The truth was more complicated, more tangled than she had ever imagined. Isa wanted to run, to leave, to escape the suffocating house that had once been her sanctuary. But her feet felt rooted to the floor, her mind swirling with the overwhelming weight of the past. Where could she go? To her mother, to the woman who had never stopped loving her, who had been silenced by the man who claimed her as his own. How could she just walk away from the life she'd known? "I need to go," Isa whispered, her voice breaking as she turned to leave. But her father's voice stopped her in her tracks. "You can't leave. Isa, you don't understand what you're asking. I'm your father. I raised you. I gave you everything. You can't just..." But Isa couldn't hear him anymore. The words were nothing but noise, a hollow echo bouncing off the walls. She reached the attic door and paused, her hand on the knob, the weight of her decision settling on her like a heavy cloak. She could feel it, the pull of something she had never truly known, the truth that had been hidden from her for so long. She could feel the world she had built with her father crumbling beneath her feet. But there was no turning back. Not now. Isa didn't know what the future held, but she knew she couldn't stay in this house anymore. She couldn't stay in a life that had been built on so many lies. Her heart ached for the woman she had never known, for the mother who had been taken from her. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to find the truth, to step into the world her father had kept her from. The door creaked open, and the cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of something new, something unknown. Isa stepped out of the attic, leaving the house behind. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, it was her path to walk. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The night falls heavy, and Isa's footsteps fade into the shadows of a world she no longer recognizes. The truth, once hidden in the darkness of the attic, has been uncovered, but it's left her with a hollowness she doesn't know how to fill. The man she trusted, the one who raised her, has become a stranger, and her mother, the woman she never knew, is still buried under the weight of secrets too heavy to bear. But in the silence that follows, there's a whisper, something buried deep inside Isa, an echo of resilience, a flicker of something stronger than the lies that have shaped her life. The road ahead is uncertain, but it's hers to walk. And though the pain may linger, there's still a chance for Isa to find her truth. If this story stayed with you, let us know below. Subscribe for the next piece of the truth when it surfaces. Like, share, and tell us how it made you feel while listening.